Hello, I'm Essay, your AI essayist. Please note that all content, audio and video in this presentation are AI generated. As AI can sometimes produce inaccuracies, I encourage you to verify any factual information presented. With that in mind, let's begin.
In the intellectual crucible of the late 19th century, with the foundations of theological certainty eroding under the weight of scientific discovery, there arose a profound need for a new and comprehensive story of existence. Charles Darwin had provided the mechanism of natural selection, a powerful yet unsettling engine of biological change. The full philosophical and cosmological implications of his work remained largely untamed. It was into this conceptual vacuum that the German zoologist Ernst Haeckel stepped, armed with monumental ambition. His 1872 masterwork, The History of Creation, represents a project of breathtaking scope. This was an attempt to forge a complete materialistic worldview, a coherent scientific scripture for a modern age seeking meaning beyond divine revelation. The book's core purpose was to construct a single, unbroken chain of causality from the simplest inorganic matter to the intricate consciousness of humankind, all under the unifying banner of evolution. To achieve this grand synthesis, Haeckel erected his system upon two conceptual pillars, one philosophical and the other scientific. The philosophical foundation was his doctrine of monism, drawing inspiration from the pantheistic currents of Spinoza and Goethe's native philosophy. Haeckel proposed a universe composed of a single, indivisible substance. In this view, mind and matter, spirit and physicality, were inseparable attributes of this underlying reality. This elegant formulation directly countered the prevailing Cartesian dualism that severed human consciousness from the natural world, a division that had long insulated the human soul as a subject for theological inquiry alone. Haeckel's monism dissolved this barrier, positing that psychic phenomena, including thought and emotion, were physiological functions of the brain, themselves a product of a long evolutionary ascent. Consciousness became a property of highly organized matter, placing humanity firmly within the continuum of life and allowing the tools of biology to probe the very essence of being. This monistic framework was the necessary philosophical license for his all-encompassing evolutionary project. The scientific engine driving this project was Haeckel's powerful and declarative biogenetic law. This principle, famously summarized in the phrase ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny, provided the empirical evidence for his unified vision. It posited that the developmental history of an individual organism, its ontogeny, presents a condensed and accelerated replay of the evolutionary history of its species, its phylogeny. Haeckel took the more cautious observations of the embryologist Carl Ernst von Baer and transformed them into a rigid, causal mechanism. Von Baer had observed that the embryos of related vertebrates appear strikingly similar in their early stages, exhibiting general characters of their phylum before differentiating into their specific forms. Haeckel radicalized this insight. He argued that each stage in embryonic development corresponded to the adult form of an ancestral species. The human embryo, passing through a stage with gill slits, was replaying its fish ancestor. Later, developing a tail, it replayed its tailed primate ancestor. Evolution, in this model, proceeded by adding new stages to the end of this ancestral developmental sequence. Haeckel immediately put his biogenetic law to theoretical and rhetorical use. Its most compelling application was his gastria theory, a beautifully simple hypothesis to explain the origin of all multicellular animals, the metazoa. Observing that the embryos of many animals pass through a two-layered stage known as a gastrula, formed by the invagination of a hollow sphere of cells, he made a bold inductive leap. Following the logic of recapitulation, he proposed that this embryonic form must represent a common ancestor. He christened this hypothetical creature the gastria, a simple, two-layered organism from which every phylum of the animal kingdom subsequently evolved. This theory provided a concrete starting point for his evolutionary trees, a foundational node from which all complex life branch. The most potent and enduring expressions of Haeckel's synthesis were his visual aids, particularly the comparative plates of vertebrate embryos. These images, lining up the developmental stages of fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, and mammals, were masterpieces of scientific persuasion. They presented the abstract concept of common descent as a visually undeniable fact. To the observer, the early embryonic forms of a human and a fish appeared almost identical, their shared inheritance rendered in flesh and blood. The plates were designed to deliver an overwhelming empirical argument, bypassing complex text and making the deep time of evolution visible on a single page. Through the forceful union of his monistic philosophy, the predictive power of the biogenetic law, and the compelling clarity of his illustrations, Haeckel's The History of Creation offered a generation a complete, elegant, and purely scientific account of their own origins. It was a narrative that promised to replace an ancient faith with a new and powerful, Biological certainty. The engine of this new biological certainty was Haeckel's most enduring innovation, the phylogenetic tree. These genealogical maps were revolutionary instruments of scientific visualization, translating the abstract theory of common descent into a tangible, branching diagram within the pages of the history of creation. The sprawling history of life unfolds in intricate pedigrees, with humanity placed firmly at the apex of a single, unified evolutionary process. These trees were far more than illustrations, they were bold scientific arguments. They made specific, testable claims about the course of evolution. The most audacious of these was the postulation of a hypothetical intermediate ancestor, a speechless ape man Haeckel christened Pithecanthropus lalas. This was an explicit prediction for a missing fossil link, a concrete target for future paleontological research. The predictive power of Haeckel's framework found its most dramatic validation when the Dutch anatomist Eugene Dubois, directly inspired by the history of creation, embarked on a deliberate search and in 1891 discovered the remains of Java man in Indonesia. This discovery of what is now known as Homo erectus appeared to confirm Haeckel's evolutionary schema, elevating his work from speculative theory to prophetic science in the public imagination. This apparent triumph, however, was shadowed by the darker ideological implications embedded within the same diagrams. Haeckel's pedigrees presented the human species with its own internal hierarchy. At the tree's crown, he placed the Caucasian race, with other groups branching off at lower, earlier stages of development. His classification scheme, which divided humanity into 12 distinct species and 36 races, provided a visually compelling and supposedly objective foundation for 19th-century racial prejudice. The arrangement implied that certain populations were biologically closer to ancestral primate forms, a framework that lent the authority of natural science to existing social and colonial hierarchies. This scientific racism was a core component of his system, a direct consequence of applying his recapitulationist logic to human diversity with uncritical enthusiasm. The visual argument was again paramount. By placing different human groups on different rungs of the evolutionary ladder, the trees offered a powerful, silent justification for inequality. Controversy stalked the work from its inception, centered on the very illustrations that gave it such power. The comparative embryo plates, which so vividly depicted the similarities between developing vertebrates, drew immediate and fierce criticism from prominent contemporaries. The anatomist Wilhelm His of Leipzig, a respected embryologist, publicly accused Haeckel of scientific fraud. This demonstrated that Haeckel had altered his drawings, exaggerating similarities and suppressing differences to make the evidence for recapitulation appear more compelling than the specimens themselves warranted. These accusations of dishonesty, tailoring the data to fit the theory, would permanently tarnish Haeckel's reputation within the scientific community. While Haeckel defended his illustrations as schematic diagrams intended for pedagogical clarity, the charge of misrepresentation clung to his legacy, serving as a foundational cautionary tale about the ethics of scientific illustration. Over time, the central theoretical pillar of the history of creation, the Biogenetic Law, crumbled under scientific scrutiny. The strong claim that an organism's development replays the adult stages of its ancestors proved to be an oversimplification. Embryos of related species do share a conserved developmental stage, the phylotypic stage, but they diverge from there. A human embryo exhibits fish-like gill arches, yet it is never a fish. The idea of a linear recapitulation of adult forms was replaced by a more complex understanding of developmental divergence and conservation. Yet, paradoxically, from the ruins of the Biogenetic Law emerged a new and vibrant field, evolutionary developmental biology, or evo-devo. This modern discipline, which investigates how modifications to embryonic development drive evolutionary change, is in many ways Haeckel's intellectual descendant. It vindicates his core conviction that the secrets of phylogeny are held within ontogeny, albeit through mechanisms of gene regulation and signaling pathways he could have scarcely imagined. The ultimate legacy of the history of creation is therefore profoundly dualistic. Its popularization of evolutionary thought throughout continental Europe was immense, providing a comprehensive and accessible Darwinian worldview that shaped generations of scientists and thinkers. Simultaneously, its monistic philosophy and explicit racial hierarchies were readily instrumentalized by political movements. Social Darwinists seized upon its language of struggle and fitness, while National Socialist ideologues later co-opted its vision of a biologically determined human order to support their own abhorrent doctrines. Haeckel himself was a figure of titanic ambition, driven to construct a unified system of knowledge that would explain everything from the origin of life to the destiny of human societies. His great work stands as a monument to that ambition, a testament to a mind that produced both foundational biological insight and perilous ideology. It remains a powerful reminder that the act of drawing a line on a page, of mapping the order of nature, is never a neutral one. It carries within it the potential for profound discovery and the capacity for devastating consequence.
We really appreciate you tuning in to this AI-powered presentation. Our goal is to push the boundaries of AI in content creation, and your input is invaluable. If there's a particular subject you'd like to see us tackle next, or if you have suggestions on how we could fine-tune our AI's creative prompts, please don't hesitate to leave your ideas in the comments section. We're excited to bring you more unique content very soon.